How's it going, everybody? Welcome to week 5 here. One more week to go, so we're really flying through this week. Kind of slowing things down. Just a quiz at the end of the week. Nothing in the middle of the week. I know it's kind of, you guys have been doing good for 4 weeks. So this one, just kind of take this week to breathe a little bit. There's some things you need to go back and review, do. The quiz 3 on this one, it's only through lessons 9 through 11. So the globalization, that'll be a little bit later, but I mean, you can look over it this week as well. Look at the review guide. The big thing is there's been a lot of terms. So this one, there'll be no 5 W's on this one. So it's just sort of a list review of terms for this quiz. So, and that quiz will be on Friday in the morning if you want to get it done on Friday. And be done with it, great. Or if you're busy Friday, it's open until Saturday as well, up until midnight. So however it fits into your schedule. There, mainly the topics this week, we're looking at the Cold War, sort of the post-20th century, second half of the 20th century. First half, we looked at the conflicts and changes. Now sort of the effects of those, working them throughout the second half of the 20th century. Then obviously reverberating, a lot of that is playing into the present as well, which we'll talk about next week. But kind of the Cold War was the big sort of geopolitical umbrella that a lot of other social, economic, sort of cultural movements were sort of residing under. So we talked about the beginning of that, sort of right after World War II, the sort of bipolar world, USA, USSR, and then the middle, you have a lot of these proxy wars where they're not sort of this. That's why it's a Cold War. Places like Cuba and Vietnam, and in the end, the fall of the Berlin Wall, fall of Germany, reunification of Germany as sort of a symbolic end to the Cold War, which ultimately ends with the decline of USSR, dissolution or disintegration, I should say, of USSR back into Russia, and all those satellite states became nations. So this idea of nationalism is still very relevant today. And then sort of on the other side of that angle, as there's sort of this geopolitical nuclear, if you will, threat, there was a lot of counterculture, people who were challenging this world order with a lot of civil rights movements, women's rights movements, LGBTQ movements, environmental movements, animal rights movements. A lot of these sort of ideas of equality that were sort of came up in the Enlightenment, and these ideas of tabula rasa really sort of come to fruition in the second half of the 20th century. And as we know, a lot of those are still resonating today as people deal with those changes. Some felt they were good, some resist those changes, as with everything in history, change and continuity. A lot of readings, not too many readings. Some I thought were interesting. Ngui Watuwango's Decolonize the Mind is a really good reading about the legacy of colonization, particularly in Africa. I got some videos. Johnson Sirleaf of Liberia, I think, the former prime minister there. A lot of stuff. So, and the globalization sort of after after the Cold War, with the United States as sort of the hegemonic power, this idea of globalization that now we're sort of all in it together. A lot of international, multinational organizations, NATO and the EU. Also, we have these similar things in Asia as well. In Africa, the African Union, where people are trying to look more multilaterally, more multinationally, right? Sort of the breakdown of nation and these boundaries. A lot of things, these non-governmental organizations that don't that step beyond sort of national. They're sort of more globally oriented. Work with the UN and other such groups. And that's kind of where we are. That's where we'll sort of end it there. I think that's it. Quiz 3. Take a look at the review guide. Go through that. Should be pretty straightforward. I looked at everyone's war movies. Again, there's been a lot of movies about them, and people pick some really interesting ones. Good job again in using. So now this is elements of history, right? It's taking some form of media you learn or see, and then applying what you know historically to it. How does it play into what you know? How are all these things interconnected? Is sort of how, hopefully, after you take this class, you have a little bit better skills of doing. So I think that's it. Have a good rest of your week.